Hello, Kitty. Good, you can hear. Great. All right, I think I'm.
Sure.
Hello.
I can hear just fine.
And so I can be very soft.
Worship ran a little late today.
It was communion, camp on Sunday, and.
Hello, Jonathan. Good morrow to you. It still is morrow.
I was at the fair yesterday, so that's quite apropos.
You were where?
At Renaissance Fair, Sherwood.
Oh, yeah. Done that a time or two.
Who chaperoning what?
Chaperoning, the middle, Henry Middle School, Henry Middle Theater, months.
Oh, the theater class went.
What age student do you have in Henry?
Sixth and eighth grades, so,
Friend Joan,
He's in North.
give me a flavor. Would you help distribute these mighty pages?
Look, I have teaching skills. We used to be able to do that. Do you want a copy for yourself?
I have it, thank you. All right. I note that it is 11:35. And that means that because worship ran late, I'm running late. But there's no time like the present to start. That being said, I emailed the handout out in advance, and today in our introduction to Reformed worship class, we have a laboratory. And so the only thing that you need for our laboratory is a pen, a writing device.
Do you care what color it is?
I do not care what color it writes, and I'm sure that if you don't have one, we can find one.
Wow, got one here, thank you.
This is a very resourceful community.
Yeah.
Immediately. Do you need one as well?
We are going to pray using the prayer provided in the handout. And then I've got a few notes that I want to catch up on from our previous weeks. And then we're going to get into the laboratory. So on page 2 of the handout, you will see, I did, thank you. You will see the responsive opening prayer. I'll read the unbold if you would read the bold. The love of God has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us.
We dwell in God.
Give thanks to the Lord and call upon God's name.
Make known God's deeds among the peoples.
Sing to God, sing praises to God.
And speak of all God's marvelous works.
Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty.
Who was and is to come.
Spirit of truth, pour out your presence on us. Cause wonders to occur as we dream your dreams and see your visions. Create unity and love as you weave us together as one body of Christ, one family of God, one community of justice and peace.
Holy God, who comes to us in prayer, visits us from the throne of heaven, and sets us abiding with amazement and joy. You open our paths to new visions and guide our feet deeper into your wisdom. Give us faith to trust your presence through Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you and also Spirit, one God and only forever.
And so, okay, so a few notes catching up on some of the things from our previous weeks. I come with show and tell into our laboratory. One of the sessions that we talked about recently was about matter, time, space, and matter, language, symbols, and culture. And I want to, today the laboratory is about our exercise is the space, the time, the matter, language, symbols, culture. We're going to do some activities around that. And why that's important as we prepare our worship space, worship time, and the words in which we use. And so a few things to note. First off, on the handout that I gave you, and I emailed this in advance, so you all do have an emailed copy of this. Kitty and Marcelo, you two should have a PDF of this. On page 22, you'll see this chancel, which is my former church. Now, when I arrived, that pipe organ did not exist. So it was the second summer that I was there that they had these pipes donated to them maybe 15 years earlier, but they had to raise money to install them. And that was about a $1.4 million project to install these professionally. And it took a little more than 4 months. You have to have a special artist to install and tune pipes. So there was some controversy related. While the pipes were given to the church as a gift, it also meant that whether it was the church's vision and dream or not, they were going to have to raise money and install this. Now, it just so happened that this was in alignment with that church. But it became the dominant piece that you saw when you walked into the sanctuary every single time was this massive organ. And I promise you that if you ever wondered if there was an instrument that God could hear and say, turn it down, this organ. It was miraculous. There were only 2 like it in an 800-mile radius. It was phenomenal to be in worship with it, where you have not only an auditory, but a corporal feel of the music glorifying God. But in and of itself, because it became the dominant centerpiece, it then became in a church setting, and because it would create a controversy and it was such this march to focus, it could become an idol where we elevated this instrument above the sanctuary, above our love of music, higher than our love for God, and it could become an idol. So one of the things that I thought was absolutely brilliant, and the artist, the engineer, the architect who designed this space, was what you don't see along the side of the chancel. You see the back chancel wall, but along the side are 300 pipes on either side, and there are 3 stained glass windows on either panel windows on either side. And when you put these pipes up, they were going to cover these stained glass windows. If you were sitting in the pews, you can't really see them, but the choir who sat underneath that faced towards the center so they could always see the windows. And the brilliance of the architect who designed the space was, this is the Paul window, and I'm going to zoom in. I did not include this in your handout. This is the Paul window, and what the artist did was he arranged the pipes so that they would not encumber your view of the side panels, which were the different disciples. And specifically, as you're looking at Paul and Paul's theology, without the pipes, Paul was still there, one finger pointing down and one finger pointing up. And what Paul's theology was, you who are there on earth, your life is meant to give glory to God up above. And what I thought was brilliant about the way in which they thought about the symbols and the space and the matter was that now Paul is pointing to the instrument, the organ. This instrument is designed for the glory and to be used for this instrument here is designed to be used for the glory of God up above. Do you see that? Again, there is some real rational, reasonable thought as to how we prepare our space with the matter and the symbolism therein. Now, stained glass windows, are in and of themselves a piece of art, right? They are arts of work. We have a stained glass artist, a retired Lutheran pastor who worshiped with us on Sundays. His name is Roger Erickson. This is Kathy and Russ Gaiman's, Kathy Gaiman's father, Russ Gaiman's father-in-law, who is a stained glass artist. And he, like Joan Salvon, as we've already described, would be offended to think that that the art stops at the stained glass, that they create what they create so that you would look through it to see the glory of God. Now, the second picture down below, no, I'm sorry, the first picture, their primary centerpiece stained glass in my former church was a transfiguration window, not a common scene that you see in the chancel of worship places. But this was the transfiguration window. And what seems really bizarre is the second picture. At the foot of Jesus, you have James, John, and Paul. Yes, Peter, Paul, James, John, and Peter. You see, I've circled it there. There is what?
Looks like a cowboy.
Of what color? Well, all right, so it's 4 planes. It's blue.
Oh, okay.
It's a blue, large, overflowing cowboy hat. Seems quite anachronistic, does it not, for the transfiguration scene? Yes. So what is it doing there? It's doing there because the artist who designed and created the transfiguration window, that was his signature look. And he incorporated his signature look of this big billowy blue cowboy hat in all of the art that he did. So what does that say about the essence of, about what the stained glass window's function then is? What happens here?
Yeah,
Right.
turns into an advertisement.
Right.
I did it.
Correct. And so what happens is that you're being able to see through it to the glory of God gets stunted. Because now you're saying, what the heck is that hat doing there? That is an anachronistic hat. It doesn't fit. And on the side of the nave was also, 12, 14 on each side panels of stained glass. And he did those as a second run of building, and he put his purple hat and his blue hat in those stained glass windows as well. So that is where, as we're looking at art in worship and the matter of worship, the symbolism of worship, where when we are infusing our own pride into something, we begin to distort its function. Does that make sense? I think these are great examples of the way in which if I were to write a sermon, which is also art, there is an art to preparing the work that we do in preaching, but I were to always draw attention to the goodness of me and had a signature element about the goodness of me and my brilliance in each sermon, I would think that you all would run me out of town on the rails, or at least call me to task on it, correct? Right, because I'm trying to infuse how great I am instead of talking about how great God is. Now, one may say, well, what if he had placed his actual signature? There is a spot, and you can't see it in this picture. There is a plaque in there that does have this stained glass was designed by, and it had in the brass plaque his signature, which is okay, but it didn't go into the art, which is supposed to draw our transcendence towards God. Now, on the back side, I mentioned this last week, that if you were to go to All Saints Episcopal Church, this is on 31st Street. It's across the street from the Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And if you were to go in there on the brightest part of the day and all the lights were out, you would stumble because the stained glass is so thick and so much that no light shines through it. And the artwork in there tells a great story of the movement of God's people and the disciples in the early church on throughout the last 2,000 years, including the Battle of the Alamo is in one of the stained glass panels, and the Revolutionary War is in one of the panels, but also their centerpiece of the chancel back wall that hangs above the altar for communion in the sacred place of peace was this top panel. And that top panel, the second person you see there, the one on the right, is Robert E. Lee, General Robert E. Lee of the Southern Confederate States. And that panel was built into this place where that light is shining through on the bottom there. So what they have done in the last 5 to 7 years is they've removed the panel, preserved it, but chose not to replace it, but to allow the brilliance of the light of God to shine through. And therefore, again, in thinking about our symbols, our culture, our language, our matter, our space, and the time in which we live, makes a theological statement that which we once had elevated as the way, we can recognize and acknowledge contemporarily the sins of our past. And in doing so, we can remove that from us and allow the brilliance of God's grace to shine through. Make sense?
I haven't heard something not too long, well, it's been over a couple of years ago, but I like it because when we know better, we do better.
That's right. When we know better, we do better. And that is in no way to say that we are better than the architects and the worshiping community of 100 years ago, who elevated Robert E. Lee, because in some way we are all a part of the culture of our time.
Yes.
And I have my great grandparents were Presbyterian missionaries to China. They had 4 boys and a girl. In 1919, they arrived in a small island in the South China Sea called Hainan, completely wild, as you can imagine. And they were there to bring Jesus to the natives. And my great grandmother kept a diary that I was just given a couple of years ago that had been transcribed. It had been typed up from her. And it is a gift. It is a miraculous, beautiful gift for me to be able to read the way in which she wrote about her faithfulness, God's leading, God's mission, God's provision, God with them through the native persons of the island who murdered their fellow missionaries, kidnapped them, and then through World War I, where they were interred in Japanese internment camps. And it's a beautiful diary. But what it is rich on is the culture of missionary thinking 100 years ago, which is very colonialistic, which is very supersessionism, as in our Christian faith is superior to your native faith or your paganistic faith, and we're here to save you. That is not how we teach missionaries and train missionaries today. But that doesn't mean that I love my great-grandparents any less, or that I devalue any of their work any less, but we represent 2 different times. We can acknowledge and honor those who came before us. I mean, if we were to really run people out on the rail for what we historically know, what they did was bad, we'd have no Apostle Paul. Am I wrong? All of those portions of the Bible would be out, right? So I think that, again, that the idea is that when we looking at our time, space, and matter, language, symbols, and culture of our worship, is it relevant to the contemporary culture or the contemporary lives that we're living? there's this expression that all worship is relevant when it's, all contemporary worship is relevant if it's truly contemporary, meaning that it is worship that is addressing and or speaking to or reflecting all that we are going through together in this time and space. And it may be that the way in which we prep our space and how we move through it is going to be very different 50 years from today than it is now. Because I guarantee you it's very different today than when it was 40 years ago at the beginning of this church. Does that make sense? Y'all with me? Great. I wanted to do some show and tell, get our brains, our gears churning, and let's get into our laboratory. So here's what we're going to do. I don't have as many people online. So Kitty and Marcelo, I think I will just have you spend some time looking through and maybe writing, typing some of the answers or making notes. And you can take a picture and scan it to me, or take a picture and send me your notes. I will want to collect your notes of what you're going to do, but I'm going to ask for you four to gather together. Okay. And y'all five to gather together. And we're going to go through, we'll take some time and kind of go through, there's 6 sections here: time, space, matter, language, symbols, and culture. And what I've done here is we're not going to unpack it today. I just want you to work on it together today. And I'm going to bounce from the different groups. Let me go through. In time, I've given just a little bit of a reminder of what we talked about then. Time. Because God is the author of history of any worship at any time. Hope Presbyterian Church worships God corporately on Sunday at 10 a.m., not 11. Here's some questions for you to reflect. You don't have to have the answers, okay? But here's some questions for reflection. How is that time slot contextually relevant to our community, the 10 o'clock? What are some of the pros and cons of a 10 a.m. worship? Is there another time slot for corporate worship that would be contextually relevant for our community? That is a question that we as a community should ask every 10 years or so. If we kept having worship at 10 o'clock our time, because that's what we've always done it, but the whole world in our community doesn't start moving until 5 in the evening, we probably ought to think about that. Are we meeting people where they are? Space. In what particular ways does the space, location, and construction of our sanctuary reflect the glory of God? Are there any examples? How does our sanctuary invite people to worship God? Are there times when our sanctuary is not the correct space for corporate worship? If yes, why? If no, why? Is there another place on campus that would be good for corporate worship? If yes, why? Where and why? If no, why? Matter. Are there particular ways, you know what I'm going to do? I got an idea. I'm going to have y'all just do those 3 questions. I'm going to have y'all do the other 3 questions. Okay. Take 10 minutes on each of those questions. In matter, in what particular ways do we prepare our sanctuary for corporate worship? And what are some tangible things we do within worship? What are some creative ways we could use to prepare our sanctuary for corporate worship or use within the context of worship? Over the years, the silly old Pastor Josh has used a variety of objects in worship in his sermon to illustrate a point. Do you remember any of them? And did they help or take away from worship? Why or why not? That might be something that would be difficult for y'all because you have for here. Some of the members of our church who I've done some wild things. That's all I'll say about that. I will have y'all focus on language, symbols, and culture. How does our language for God and God's people reflect who is welcome in worship? In what ways does it not? Is the language that we use in worship accessible for all persons, from weekly attendees to first-time seasonal visitors? Why or why not? Are there specific ways that we could do better? And what are they? Symbols. Thinking about our church property as a whole and our sanctuary specifically, what symbols have we elevated? What do these symbols mean within our context? Culture. Which of these do we lean toward more naturally? These are the ones I talked about last week: transcultural, contextual, cross-cultural, countercultural, intercultural. Which of these are harder for us? And how does our understanding of context help us in being one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church? So I'll have y'all work on those three. Marcelo, my man, good to see you. Welcome. Kitty and Marcelo, would y'all be all right talking through a couple of these? Y'all can just pick which ones. And what's great is Marcelo is also new to our community. And Kitty's only been with us for a little while and always through Zoom. So I think there's a perspective there of the worship experience through our YouTube experience that the two of y'all could visit and go forth. Any questions? I will pull us back together. Oh, yes, Kitty, go ahead.
Marcelo asked in the chat if we have any of these questions written down somewhere.
Okay, I will. Yes, I thought I had emailed them. I'll make sure that I have the right email. What's that?
I didn't see any of them. There was like a email that came through that said there was no handout for this week. And that's the only thing I saw.
Oh, blast.
Yeah.
Oh, what a bonehead. I'm gonna go right over and I'll email it to you within 3 minutes. What a bonehead move. But for now, and I didn't ask anything related to online worship through the YouTube and that experience. In what ways might that be helpful for welcoming folks? In what ways may that feel unwelcoming? And if y'all two could begin talking about the online worship experience, the rest of the questions will come to you here shortly. I will pull us all back together at 11:25. Okay?
12:25.
That's what I said, 12:25. I'm gonna go back in time.
Are we?
But did he connect you and I, Marcelo?
Yeah, we're connected, but we can hear everything else that's going on. So,
Sorry, but it's easier for me to not move.
hey, can somebody in the room like mute y'all and mute us for you?
I know.
Natalie? Natalie?
Right.
One second, hold on.
Sort of burning costs they want to Carolyn.
I don't know if they're gonna see that, but actually, no, wait, hold on. Maybe we can just move them.
How was that?
So are we doing?
No, I'm just kidding.
You may be more computer savvy than I am.
I thought we could mute them, but I don't think we can actually.
I think it has to be the host.
Yeah. I thought we could like make it so that we
I
could.
know Natalie, if we could get her attention, knows how to do it.
Okay, so what was the question he asked us exactly?
He wants us to start talking on the benefits of how that online worshiping would be to people or not to people. Which ones would it not appeal to?
Yeah, that's.
I don't really know. The pros are obviously that if you're not physically able to go to church, like my great grandmother wasn't able to, this was not an option for her in the past, so she just didn't go to church, she didn't watch church, nothing, right? So you can at least experience that if that's something that you want through the online option. Obviously you don't get the community. A huge portion of the worship service itself is organized as like gathering and then the word and then response and then sending out, right? You don't get the gathering portion of it in the same way that you would get it if you were actually present with those people. I think it makes it a little bit less personal. Like you can also get up and go do things or not lose focus in your house more easily. You're not in the space. You lose the entire sense of sacred space that you have when you go to church. You're not in that space anymore. You might be in the mental space and it might be sacred time still because you're still involved with the church, but you're not in the sacred space. and I think it was William James wrote about the thin place, where you have times or places where you feel closer to God, you feel closer to the presence of God in those spaces, whether it's like a piece of music or it's in a certain
I was gonna say, I'm not
location,
thinking
the
of
wild
words that the Lord's Prayer.
nature,
Yeah,
wherever
wherever
you
two
feel
or
closer
more
to
are
For
God.
someone
gathered.
new.
And I don't think you get that same thin space, so to speak, that online that you would get if you were actually in the church space or somewhere else like that. So yeah, that's my just random shotgunning
Yeah.
of thoughts.
Well, and I'm in Dallas area.
Okay.
So I zoom in, obviously because it's my son's church, and I became a member there. So I'm their first virtual member.
Wow.
And then I try to come down there once a month
But I
to
think our
be
church.
in person in the church.
I didn't know you were actually a member of the church just virtually.
I am, yes. That's what came out of COVID.
I don't
They
think
had
they
to
use the
start
word
thinking
baptized.
outside
I
of the
think they
box.
just kind
That makes
How
sense.
do we still reach
I don't know if they said it this time, but I know
So
it's
that's
past
where they
because
got
your children.
much more in depth on their
Raised
Zoom
Christian to you feel they're ready
and
for
YouTube?
But I don't think you did today. But sometimes
Okay,
they.
well, since you're a member of the church who is virtual only, are there things that you wish the church could do that would help you as a member
Was
who is not
always kind of
present in the
offended
same
that I couldn't
space?
take communion.
Asking for mom, from dad on.
Yeah.
I really
Mom,
haven't
dad, and
thought of
we should go
that
on.
because
And,
I
and some
feel
of that
like
may be because I was
my
an
needs
only
are
child,
being
so I
met.
was pretty well used to being included.
I do
in
agree
everything
with
I
you
did.
on that.
And mama said, well,
I have a tendency to get up and refresh my coffee or something during
understand what
service
it means.
that I
Once you
wouldn't
have
do
God's
if I were there.
confirmation Before you could have communion. And that
I'll
was
say
at junior high
I
school.
take my daughter to
He was
church
not
every
going
week,
to
right?
classes.
And so she goes to church with me. She kind of understands like there's other people around. I have to behave a certain way.
I don't remember what.
And
was
today's the
called.
first time I
It was
watched
class.
Hope from home, and it was
It's
not the
not.
same because she's at home. She doesn't understand like, hey, this is still sacred time, just not sacred space. So she's running around crazy.
Was
And
that a
I have to get up and deal with that. So I mean, it's different when you have like a small kid and they don't understand any of that. But, I guess mentally, like she processes, hey, we're in a space of other people doing a certain thing and we have to act a certain way. But
And it changed
it's a
while I
different,
was.
like she doesn't understand the concept of connecting the time with the space. So.
From communicants to.
From who could accept, who could. be-
Oh, okay.
They changed it to anywhere you could be
What else
baptized.
can I say?
It was being
Well, you're
raised.
relatively new,
But
so
my
what
mother
do
had to
you
go
think
to
it could
community
help
center.
you with?
Until you go through community spots, you cannot get communion.
Could they do anything differently?
So if you.
I don't think so. Everyone's been super welcoming. We did do that. Oh, he muted. Okay, cool. There was the worship plus 2 thing, and I like signed up and sent my emails to a bunch of people, and I got nothing back. So I don't know if like people, it's just like a slow like process or what, but it'd be nice if I could actually like be involved elsewhere other than just going on Sundays and special events and things like that. But and like I
Worship
said,
plus two, I'm not, what is that?
they had like a little, I don't know what it's called exactly, it was a service fair, and they had like all the projects and all the things that people are doing for ministry outside of the church or even inside the
Oh,
church and
yes,
stuff
yes.
like that. And so I went to that and I like put my email on a couple of things that were interesting to me, and then I didn't hear anything back from anybody. So, but
Can y'all see
Someone
me?
dropped the ball.
I can't see. Yeah.
Oh Lord, I'm so sorry about that. First off, man, it's Palm Sunday. The email was sent. You know, I have the questions, and I muted y'all, but I totally forgot to mute the room.
Yes.
So sorry.
No worries.
So it should be better now. The worship plus 2 is that the idea is that worship should be a primary thing that you're doing. And then plus 2, one should be making a commitment to continue to grow in your life. And one is to make a commitment to be a service. So one thing for growth weekly, one thing for service. And so, but which is what's great from y'all, which is if that's not clear, then we need to, this is what I would love for you to write in the notes. the fact that, and Marcelo, you said it, that you put your name down on things and no one followed up, that is great information for me to hear, because there's probably other persons who are new to the community who would have liked to have been a part of something, and our leaders dropped the ball on that. So you're both asking great questions, and both has been a part of Worship Online a lot. And then Marcelo, you've been doing the class via Zoom. And I think that online or the tech feedback would be really helpful in the notes that I'm asking you to make for lab today. Any
And
questions?
in essence, I am doing the 2+2 already by being a church member. And then I also am over the meal train. I can do that virtually from here.
Correct. That's correct. I'm going to step off and let y'all continue taking notes. Kitty, if you would be the scribe and send them to me, I would appreciate it. Marcelo, I don't know whether the connection has been made or not, but Kitty is my mother. I don't know if that connection not, which is great. But I will unmute y'all back in here in about 15 minutes or so.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
Okay, I'm making notes now.
Okay.
Yes, I knew what 2+2 was. I didn't, Josh signed me up rather quickly. And so I didn't see an email as such.
Gotcha.
So you're saying it's not as personal by Zoom?
Yeah. Where's the?
I'm a real outgoing person, and so I like the fellowship of other people.
Yeah.
And that's why I also like to try to get down there once a month.
Sure. You just go to the service? Do you go to other stuff like, I guess, the classes afterwards, right?
I do
Is there
go
stuff
to the
before?
class afterward, yes.
Gotcha.
But they also have that on Zoom as well, and that I've done a number of those with Josh, the Bible studies and
When is
different
that?
aspects.
When is the Bible study?
His is usually this time slot.
Oh, okay.
So this would be normally a Bible study that he does.
Gotcha.
Right now, we're doing this service right now, this worship and understanding all these different aspects right now. In the past, we've done things on different prophets or trying to remember the last one. Some of them are way above my head. And then some of them I have actually learned. But since I can't be there to do Bible studies in class, it works for me.
Yeah. Makes sense.
They also have a men's Bible study. I don't know if you work or not. I think through the week on Wednesday mornings or something.
Yeah, not at the moment, but I have other stuff I have going on. So
Yeah, me too. Like
Don't
while
we all?
ago, after service, I quickly ran out and watered a few plants out that I have in my garden and greenhouse and opened up the door and ran back in.
yeah.
But I like that you mentally make note that that is a time of worship when you set out to do Zoom.
Mhm.
Okay. How old is your daughter? I think
She's
I've
4.
seen you all.
I think you have to. I believe I've seen you at church. She's 4 years old.
Yeah. I think you sat behind me one time when I was there.
I'm pretty sure we did. Yeah. I think Phoenix might have been sitting with you at the time, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Any other ideas? How are you with 10 o'clock as time of worship?
I'm okay. I'm fine with it, I guess. It does feel like it's in the middle of the day and it kind of breaks up the day, but people have to get ready. They have to like drive times to go to church, whatever it might be. And then by the time you're done, it's lunchtime, and then you eat lunch, and then your day is basically like almost over at that point. You have like 5 hours left in the day. It does break it up that way. I'm I don't know. I have preferences for when I would rather church be, but
What time would that be?
early. But I wake up
Early.
at 5 a.m. So by the time church comes for me, it's been 5 hours since I woke up. So
Right,
it really isn't like the middle of my day versus like if you wake up at 5 a.m., then church is at 8:30, like my church I used to go to for a brief time was. Then I got ready, ate breakfast, got my kid ready. I got ready, went to church, came home, and it was still like 10 o'clock. I still have the entire day ahead of me, right? And it
yes,
also, instead of breaking up the middle of your day, it starts your day with church. And so then you go through the rest of your Sunday. Um, I guess having just experienced that, it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day, as opposed to you wake up and you do everything already. You have to get ready and all that, and then go to church. I guess it feels a little bit different. Doesn't quite set the tone because it's, like I said, breaking up your day.
right.
That's my personal opinion. It might be different for other people, but
Well, and I grew up in a church where we had two services, one at 8:30, one at 10:30. So y'all had
my
four
the
services?
church, yeah, I went to Great Hills Baptist Church, which is down the road from Hope, and they had service at like 8 o'clock and I think 9:30 and then 11, and then they had the night service at 5 on Sundays. And the new pastor that came in was like, "This is ridiculous. I don't have the mental capacity to handle this. Like, I can't do 4 sermons a day." So he cut it down to I think 2. But yeah, they still did that. 4 is bananas. That's so many services. At that point, you just need to split your church up.
Yes. Or have a lot more preachers.
Yeah, that too. I think Austin Stone here, they did that. They had like 3 services in the mornings, but they had teachers rotating like weekly. So you do like it's Sunday and you do all 3, and then somebody else would do it for the next 3 weeks or whatever.
Yes, my sister goes to the Methodist church here in Dallas or Richardson. And they have like 7 ministers,
Oh, okay.
but it's one of those mega churches,
Yeah. That's how
which I don't handle well. So I
No,
like
I
a
feel
smaller, more informal church.
yeah, I feel like it's a lot less personal when you go and you don't know over half the people that are in there. And
Or
like
you're watching a TV screen.
yeah, you
There's
can't see the
church
pastor
house.
because you're so far away.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
stadium seating kind of thing. And
Yep.
yes,
That's how it was. Because when I grew up in a Bible church, and it was smaller, but it wasn't super small. We still had maybe like probably 1,000 people, maybe 800, somewhere in that range. So it was not like a small church. But then we started going to a big Baptist church, and that church was 2,500 people that were going every single week. So it was twice as big. And that was just the people who would go every single week, not counting everyone else who would come. And they would fill up that 2,000 seat. It was an amphitheater basically, 2 or 3 times a day. I was like, that's so many people. Like, I don't know how anyone knows anybody in this place. It was shocking until I found out about mega churches. Like, that's just not like that's nuts.
yeah.
I don't understand that at all. Can you think of any ways that the like virtual worship and virtual class could be improved?
And well, the things that they needed to improve on were the AV, the audio visual things. And they have actually done that since I started doing these.
That's good.
Yeah,
was watching
this,
for-
this class right now that they're in, where Josh can see the back of the room, which is where we are, up on the screen.
Oh, okay.
So it's
Gotcha.
like he is teaching to us as well as the people in the class.
Gotcha.
And at first, that screen was right behind him. And so he couldn't see us, or we raise a hand or send a text in the chat and stuff. So
Yeah. I was wondering about that. Like, how does he see us? Is we up on a screen? Because I don't think he was controlling the computer. I think someone else is doing that. So I imagine that's like off to the side somewhere out of the way.
yeah, it's to the side of him where all the controls are. But at least now he can see us more readily, and the audio is much better. The volume and everything, and what's going on in the room.
Yeah. I'd say the worship service, because it's the first time I ever watched it virtually and not been there. It was really like uneven though. So like one person would be really loud and one person would be really low.
Yeah,
And 'cause
I
was watching on my-
don't think, what's her name, John and his wife, I'm not as sure that she didn't have the pocket or earpiece thing like John and Josh did.
Yeah.
And she was totally relying on that speaker phone that she spoke into. And it was not very loud.
No. I thought it turned. I have like a speaker system, and I was watching on TV, and I had a speaker system like for my living room, and I couldn't even hear it on that. It was so low.
Yeah, I had to turn up the volume on her and then turn it back down for Josh, and
Yeah. So that'd be nice if it was evened out a little bit more.
yes.
Even if it was like all like level, I could just turn it up or turn it down and not be shifting back and forth.
Right. Well, I think, like I said, that she needs the headset.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they just have the two, or that's probably a good question to ask if they have more.
Yeah. I was gonna say the sound from like the music sounded kind of tinny as well, but that's like really nitpicky. It doesn't need to be like professional grade
Well, I
quality
watched it through
sound.
my TV as well, but I don't have anything extra in the way of speakers. It's
Yeah.
just what I have on my TV.
That's fair.
But it's a new TV, and so the sound bar is really pretty good. Crystal is her name. I sit here trying to remember her name.
Crystal Levy. All I could
Yeah.
think was their daughter's name, which is Lorelai. I think it's pretty sure it's their daughter Lorelai.
It
They're
is,
like-
yeah.
Okay, because I've been leaving in the middle of services to take my kid to try and get her acclimated to go into the kids class.
Uh-huh.
And so I like know all the kids' names, but I know no parents' names.
Yeah.
So I knew Crystal, but I kept thinking Lorelai, and I was like, that's not her name. That's their kid's name. What's her name?
Yes, yeah, right.
It's also how I know like who Phoenix was, and I didn't know like he was Josh's kid.
How he was related.
Yeah, I didn't know that. And then I know like some other kids. So I was pointing them out to my kid on the screen where she was seeing. I was like, you know her? And she's like, I know her, but I don't know her name. I was like, yeah, you need to go to church more often. You need to go to that class and actually engage people.
True.
I'm still trying to think of ways that virtual like worship can be improved to help people, but I can't really think of anything.
It's not interactive for us,
No.
for the worship like a class is. It's
We need
just,
we need favor delivery for communion. So like at the time of communion, they bring you the wafer and they bring you the best.
well, that's when you grab your piece of toast and your coffee.
Sign me up for that. So you can stay right where you are, but I'm gonna bounce to each of the groups and ask you to share one thing that seemed to capture a lot of more attention. I understand you may not have gotten to all of it, and that's okay. But I'm gonna ask each group to just mention one thing that seemed to capture more of your conversation that you want to elevate up, and then we're going to close and carry on with the day. Let's start with Jonathan. Jonathan's group that had time, space, and matter. What's one thing that y'all seem to elevate or notice, or one thing that you would want to report to the rest of us about time, space, matter?
We probably spent the most time on time, ironically. And I think we all kind of agreed maybe that the single service at 10 o'clock had a lot of pros. For one thing, what's that?
Yeah.
While it is not unanimously, like everyone's preference, it still avoids things like having the congregation split for the most part, people in the latter service knowing each other in the latter service, but not really the former. It's easier for parents like me to get our kids to 10 o'clock than 8:30. Might be easier at 11, but it's a good compromise. And we can get out to lunch before the Methodists, as I believe you put it. And so yeah, those are some of the pros and cons that we were talking about.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Kitty, you want to mention something?
Marcelo, we also talked a little bit about the time. He would like an earlier time too, because he feels like it starts the day out and he still has daytime left, where 10 o'clock doesn't quite meet that. But as far as Zoom meetings and service, this morning, is there an extra headset for Crystal?
No.
No. And I thought maybe that was the case. And so the volume for you two guys is great, but
Okay.
the volume for her is not.
So I think that's a thing, and what's at the table, there was a handheld mic on the table, and I'm guessing that didn't pick her up well. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct.
So it goes back to one of the things we talked about a few weeks ago about stumbling blocks, right? So when there are technological challenges that are things that are easy to avoid, the folks who we've helped create a worship environment with at home, who are watching from home, then get cut out of that worship experience, which is why it's important and incumbent upon us to overcome those issues. And, one of the other things for the online worship experience is on Communion Sundays. And I think that it occurs to me that we did a better job when we were worshiping online as a whole community to remind you that communion is this Sunday. Join us online, but be sure to have your bread and elements ready. And I don't think that I've seen in our communications that is an invitation, that is a reminder to y'all to get ready. So then my assumption is at 10 o'clock on Sunday, we're getting ready to do communion. And you're like, well, I don't have communion. I guess I just won't serve myself. Is that what you said, Kitty, about coffee and toast?
Yeah, he was saying that he didn't feel that. And that's what I was responding with when you overheard was, that's when you have your toast and your coffee ready.
Well, Marcelo, do you want to add to that? I don't want to take your thunder away.
I said that we should have favor for communion and they should bring us communion to our doorstep, but obviously that's not realistic.
We'll call it God Dash.
God Dash. The only thing I was going to add was that when we're talking about virtual worship, it's good because you can still have that same sacred time slot that you are accustomed to, but you lose that sacred space. And I think, like, for me personally, there's it's called a thin place where you have a more closer connection with God, and you have that reverence that is set out for you because of the sacred space. but you lose that sacred space. You still have sacred time. But like this morning, my kid was running around the house because she didn't understand that, hey, I'm still like in church, I'm still worshiping, speaking of. But even though we're not there, so she understands the sacred space, she just didn't understand the sacred time. And I think that even for like me, it still affects it a little bit. You wanna say hi?
Hi, Ramsey. Hi.
So
It's
yeah,
good
well,
to
just
see
like that.
Well, I think, and Kitty, I hope you took note of that, and will send it to me. Because I think, what that really calls to mind, and Marcel, that's a great feedback, is in what way could our church leadership, our worship and music leaders help be more intentional about communicating, creating a worship space in your home. So, like for Kitty, I know is going to be almost always worshiping from online. Has she created a worship center in our home with a candle, the Bible, maybe a bowl of water? What are these things that we could say that would help craft and convert your home space into that sacred space? And that's great feedback. And I'll be sure to talk to worship music about it. Kitty, please write that down so I don't forget. Our last group was language, symbol, and culture. Would y'all elevate one thing that y'all discussed?
I mean, we discussed so much. I mean,
Right.
Some of y'all the symbols.
Spent a lot of time on language.
And symbols.
The symbols, yeah.
Yeah, symbols too.
We talked about all of the elements currently used in the logo that Hope Presbyterian has developed and the meanings behind them and how they're taken not just from outer space to be, let's make a logo, looks like this, but it pulled in elements of the church and its worshiping community. So the rainbow representing not just God's promise to Noah to keep the world safe, but also the Emmaus community that used to be very big here, as well as the inclusionary aspects of Hope currently. The trumpets in the upper right-hand corner being not just a symbol of God, but also lifting our voices and music to God. The in the lower left-hand corner with the people that taken from the rose window from the chancel at the front of the sanctuary, talking about how all people, no matter what color and how many, what gender, are included. And I forgot what fish means other than ichthus.
You know it.
But
Yeah, you know that the fish being the ichthus, the Greek word ichthus for fish, which was the symbol of this is the space where Christians gather for worship, and the symbology behind that, the Christian symbology behind that. Thank you. I think they had a healthy conversation. And I think you nailed it. The confirmation class talked about that a couple of weeks ago. I want to say 2 weeks ago. And one of their observation was, do the three trumpets represent the Trinity? And that was their fresh 13-year-old perspective of looking at symbols that, and of course, those three are also in the current rose window in the chancel. But that was their perspective of looking and wondering what that may mean. And I wasn't going to correct them. So
Your question.
Well,
Whether that was her thought.
I think Joan probably wouldn't answer it.
Right.
I think she would say if the confirmants saw the Trinity, that's what was meant to be seen.
Yeah.
I think that's what Joan would say.
And then-
Much like the earthen vessels, there's, when you look at art there, I'm sorry, you're looking at something y'all can't see. But when you're looking at art, there are often things that the artist meant, but there's also the stuff that we see as well, which is what makes art living and beautiful. I can't tell you how many times I have heard someone say to me after worship, wow, Pastor Josh, when you said blah, 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 I felt like you were saying that right to me. And I will say, I'm glad that the Holy Spirit spoke to you in that way. But then I'll get in my office and I'll say, did I really say that? And I will go back to the YouTube and rewatch it, and I never said what they said I said, but that's what they heard. That's their engagement with the art, that the Spirit spoke to them in that way. And I think that's what has to be important when we're thinking about all 6 of these theologically: time, space, matter, language, symbols, and culture. The ways in which we are crafting a sacred and meaningful experience for people to engage with the holy, and not take that for granted any single Sunday, not to get in a carbon copy of the previous Sunday because it's just easier to do that, but that every Sunday is an opportunity for that sacred and meaningful experience with God across all of these various arenas. So with that, it is time for us to come to a close. Would someone be so willing to close our time together in prayer?
Always offer. I'll do it.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that you've loved us and brought us into your family. We thank you so much that you care enough about us to want us to know you better. And we thank you for this time where we can learn about ways to communicate with you more fully and in a corporate manner. We pray that you would bless these classes and grow our faith in you, grow our appreciation of your church, and our dedication to bringing these aspects of worship into other areas of our lives, at home, and wherever it is that we worship. We pray all these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. Next week is Easter, so we're not meeting here on Easter Sunday. That being said, when we get back together in 2 weeks, we are going to begin 3 weeks of going through the elements of the liturgy, right? So from prelude to postlude, we're going to take 3 weeks of exploring from prelude to postlude, all the different pieces, what they mean, and what are the elements in creating that, those different pieces, prelude to postlude each week, okay? So we'll see you Thursday at 7 and Friday at 7 and Easter at 10. Vaya con Dios. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Kitty.